Programming instructors usually just assume you understand the relationship between the text editor and programming. However, most first-time programmers don't, despite this relationship being fundamental to all programming, and in particular, essential to your first night of homework. The one thing instructors will usually mention, mostly usually, is that to write a program, you use a text editor. But what is a text editor? If you don't have programming experience, you might think of Microsoft Word or Google Docs, but these are more technically known as word processors. The difference boils down to word processors create documents for people, while text editors create documents that are implicitly for computers to read. They're just plain text. Word processors, they add formatting. So if you can set the font to Comic Sans, the font size to 14, and italicize some words, then you're probably using a word processor. No programming languages use italicized words, and no programming language differentiates between fonts. So no programming file will include such formatting. Text without formatting is often called plain text. And creating such an unformatted file is the first step in programming. For that, you want Notepad or TextEdit or maybe an IDE recommended by your instructor. These are all text editors. However, writing the program is just the first step. If programming is like cooking, then writing a program is like writing a recipe. You can write a recipe however you want, but the recipe itself doesn't cook anything, no matter how you write it. You need a kitchen and a chef who understands these instructions to cook the actual meal. So, to run a program, you need to get a computer to read it. Often people will say the programming language reads the file, or the file runs in the programming language. For example, people might say, Python runs the Python file. This is technically ambiguous in a way that's important to recognize early on in your programming career. Python is the language that your file is written in. Like any language, that means it defines what you type. Going back to the recipe analogy, the language defines teaspoons and temperatures, ovens, and eggs. The language also defines a kind of grammar, that you have to state all of your ingredients at the beginning of the file, that each step of the recipe can only involve one ingredient, that the cooking times must be stated in minutes for some arbitrary examples. What actually runs your file is the interpreter, a program that can translate from Python into instructions that the computer understands. So it's technically correct to say Python runs the Python file, but what that really means is the Python interpreter runs the Python file. The interpreter is what you download when you quote-unquote install Python. The interpreter cooks the recipe, with the caveat that, unlike most chefs, interpreters only understand one language and will refuse to cook anything if the recipe has even a single word out of place. But this makes a bit of sense. If your chef is Dutch, your recipe had better be written in Dutch and use Celsius for all temperatures. To summarize, the text editor is where you write your program. The programming language defines what instructions you can write, and the interpreter takes those instructions and executes them, one by one, to make the program's output. This relationship holds across all programming languages. There's a bonus step for compiled languages, which you should look into if you're learning Java or C or C++ or any other compiled language. But always there's the same division between writing and running, and always you'll start with a text editor.